Thunder crashed across the rocky landscape of Haven's Edge as sheets of rain pounded the small mining colony. The storm had been raging for 3 days, turning the normally dusty settlement into a maze of mud and flooding streams. Power flickered in the prefab buildings, casting strange shadows that danced with each lightning flash. Deep in the mountains surrounding the colony, something massive stirred in the darkness. The Ravenclaw had not eaten in 8 days. The geological upheavals that made this planet so rich in rare minerals had also destroyed most of the native wildlife. Rivers had changed course, forests had been swallowed by new chasms, and the herds of grazing beasts that once provided easy meals were gone. Standing 12 feet tall on powerful hind legs, the Ravenclaw was a nightmare made flesh. It scaled. Hide was dark green with black stripes, perfect camouflage among the rocky peaks. Claws as long as human forearms extended from its massive hands, sharp enough to slice through steel plating. Rows of needle-sharp teeth filled a jaw that could crush a ground vehicle. Acid dripped from specialized glands near its fangs, capable of dissolving most materials within minutes. But right now, the apex predator was simply hungry. It had tried hunting the mechanical mining equipment, but the taste of metal and synthetic materials made it sick. The few remaining native creatures had learned to hide deep underground during storms like this. The Ravenclaw needed soft, warm flesh. It needed prey that bled. The scent hit its sensitive nostrils as it crept closer to the human settlement. Mammalian. Young. Small. The smell was carried on the wind from the colony's edge, where the prefab buildings gave way to equipment yards and storage areas. Through the driving rain, the Ravenclaw spotted its target. A small figure in bright yellow rain gear was playing near a stack of supply containers, apparently fascinated by the way water cascaded off the metal surfaces. The creature was tiny, barely reaching the Ravenclaw's knee. Perfect prey. The child appeared to be alone. The other humans were likely sheltering from the storm in their buildings or working deep in the mine shafts that honeycombed the mountain. This one had wandered away from safety, making it an easy target. Tommy Peterson was 6 years old and had never seen rain like this before. On Earth, storms were different. Here on Haven's Edge, the rain fell in sheets so thick it was like standing under a waterfall. He had snuck out of the family quarters while his parents were getting ready for their night shift in the mines. They thought he was asleep, but the sound of the storm was too interesting to ignore. He was trying to catch rainwater in an empty food container when the shadow fell across him. At first, he thought it might be his father coming to bring him inside. But when he looked up, his young mind struggled to process what he was seeing. The Ravenclaw loomed over him, water streaming off its scaled hide. Its yellow eyes glowed in the darkness, and its massive jaws opened slightly, revealing those terrible teeth. For a long moment, predator and prey stared at each other through the rain. Tommy tilted his head to one side, the way children do when they encounter something new and strange. "You're really big," he said, having to shout over the thunder. "Are you lost too?" The Ravenclaw blinked in confusion. In all its years of hunting, no prey had ever spoken to it. They usually ran screaming or froze in terror or simply collapsed from shock. This small creature was looking at it with what appeared to be curiosity rather than fear, but hunger overrode confusion. The Ravenclaw reached down with one massive clawed hand and gently scooped up the child. Tommy let out a small whoa of surprise but did not struggle or scream. He seemed more amazed than frightened by suddenly being 15 feet off the ground. "Where are we going?" Tommy asked as the Ravenclaw began moving away from the colony. "Are you taking me somewhere dry? I don't like being wet." The predator said nothing, focused on getting back to its mountain lair before the other humans discovered the child was missing. It moved with surprising grace for something so large, leaping from boulder to boulder up the steep mountainside. Each bound covered dozens of meters, carrying them quickly away from the settlement. Tommy watched the lights of the colony fade behind them with the detached interest of a child. He was not old enough to truly understand danger, and the gentle way the creature carried him suggested no immediate harm. His 6-year-old mind was already working on the puzzle of what this new friend might be. The Ravenclaw's cave was located high on the mountainside, hidden behind a curtain of falling water from an underground stream. The chamber was large enough for the creature to move around comfortably, with several smaller passages leading deeper into the mountain. Bones of previous meals were scattered in one corner, picked clean and white. The predator set Tommy down carefully in the center of the cave and stepped back to examine its prize. The child was indeed small, probably no more than 30 or 40 pounds. Hardly a full meal, but enough to quiet the gnawing hunger for a while. The Ravenclaw decided to save this morsel for later when it had built up more of an appetite. Tommy looked around the cave with interest, seemingly unbothered by the bones or the smell of decay. He walked over to the stream that provided fresh water and dipped his hand in it. "This is a nice place," he announced. "Do you live here all by yourself?" The Ravenclaw settled down near the cave entrance, blocking any escape route. It would rest for a few hours, then enjoy its meal. The storm outside showed no signs of stopping, which meant the other humans would likely wait until morning before venturing out to search for the missing child. By then, there would be nothing left to find. But as the Ravenclaw closed its eyes and listened to the small human exploring its cave, chattering to himself in that strange musical language, it had no way of knowing that it had just made the worst mistake of its very long life. The hunt was over. The reckoning was about to begin. Alice Peterson finished checking the atmospheric readings on her tablet and glanced at the chronometer on the wall. The night shift would begin in 20 minutes, and she still needed to wake Tommy from his nap. The storm outside had finally started to weaken, though rain still drummed against the walls of their family quarters. She opened the door to Tommy's small bedroom and felt her heart skip a beat. The bed was empty, covers thrown back carelessly. His bright yellow rain jacket was missing from its hook by the door. "Robert!" she called to her husband, who was gathering his mining equipment in the main room. "Tommy's not here!" Robert Peterson dropped his tools and rushed to join his wife. They searched their small living space quickly, checking every closet and corner where a 6-year-old might hide. Nothing. "He must have gone outside," Alice said, her voice tight with worry. "You know how curious he gets about the storms." Robert was already pulling on his heavy work boots. As a former military engineer, his mind immediately shifted into tactical mode. Assess the situation, identify threats, formulate a response. His little boy was missing in a storm on a planet where the local wildlife included things that could tear apart a grown man. "Alert the colony watch," he told Alice. "I'm going to check the perimeter buildings first. He might have just wandered over to watch the rain." The search began methodically. Alice used the colony's communication system to wake the off-duty miners and technicians, while Robert systematically checked every building, storage area, and equipment yard. Other colonists joined them, families with children understanding the urgency without needing explanation. It was Dr. Martinez, the colony's geologist, who found the first clue. Near the eastern supply depot, partially washed away by the rain, were tracks in the mud, not human tracks. "Robert, you need to see this," she called over the comm. The tracks were massive, 3-toed impressions that measured nearly 2 feet long. The depth of the prints suggested something incredibly heavy, but most disturbing were the smaller human footprints nearby, a child's sneakers, that stopped abruptly at the edge of the larger tracks. Robert knelt beside the prints, rain running off his jacket as he studied them with a handheld scanner. "These are fresh," he announced grimly. Made within the last few hours. Alice arrived with several other colonists, including Bill Wong, the colony's security chief, and Dr. Sarah Kim, who served as their medical officer and xenobiologist. "I've seen tracks like these before," Dr. Kim said quietly. "In the survey. Reports from the outer territories. The locals call them Ravenclaws. Apex predators, highly intelligent, capable of problem-solving and tool use." "How dangerous?" Alice asked, though she could guess the answer from the grim expressions around her. "Extremely. They're ambush hunters, strong enough to tear apart a mining mech, and they're opportunistic feeders. They'll eat anything organic." Robert stood up, slowly, water dripping from his hair. His jaw was set in a way Alice recognized from their military days together. It was the expression he wore when preparing for combat. "Bill, I need you to organize search teams," he said. "Dr. Kim, what do we know about their behavior patterns, hunting territories, nesting sites?" "They're solitary creatures, typically territorial. If it took Tommy, it would have headed for high ground, probably a cave system in the mountains. They like to store food for later consumption." The words hit Alice like a physical blow, but she forced herself to stay focused. Tommy was alive. He had to be. And if he was alive, they would find him. Robert walked to the edge of the colony, looking up at the towering mountains that surrounded Haven's Edge. Lightning still flickered among the peaks, illuminating the rocky crags and deep canyons. Somewhere up there, his son was waiting for rescue. "How many search teams can we field?" he asked Bill. 15 adults, maybe 20 if we wake everyone. But Robert, searching those mountains in this weather, at night. "Then we make our own weather," Robert said grimly. He activated his personal comm and began calling in favors from his military contacts. "This is Peterson on Haven's Edge. I need emergency authorization for a military equipment requisition." While Robert coordinated resources, Alice used her geological survey equipment to map potential cave systems in the mountains. Her scientific training helped her stay calm, but inside she was fighting panic. Tommy was so small, so trusting. He probably thought the creature was some kind of strange, new friend. Dr. Kim approached with a portable analysis unit. "I've been studying the tracks," she said. "The stride pattern suggests the creature was moving carefully, not running. And look at this." She pointed to a section where the tracks showed an unusual pattern. It changed its grip here, adjusted, its hold. That suggests the prey was still alive and possibly struggling. "Or talking," Alice said quietly. "Tommy talks to everyone, even stray animals." The thought of her chatty, fearless little boy trying to make conversation with a 12-foot predator should have been funny. Instead, it filled Alice with dread. Tommy's complete lack of fear around new creatures was endearing when dealing with colony pets. It could be fatal when dealing with something that saw him as dinner. Robert returned with news that military supply drops were being arranged. Emergency beacons, climbing gear, portable shelters, and enough firepower to level a mountain if necessary. The storm was expected to clear by dawn, which would give them better visibility for the search. "We'll find him," he promised Alice, pulling her close. "Tommy's smart, and he's tougher than he looks. Remember when he got lost in the ventilation system on the transport ship? He turned it into a game." Alice nodded, drawing strength from her husband's confidence. But she also knew Robert well enough to see the worry behind his determined expression. They both understood what they were facing. The Ravenclaw had taken their child to its lair, and creatures like that didn't usually keep their prey alive for long. As the search teams organized their equipment and studied topographical maps, none of them realized that high in the mountains, a very different kind of discovery was taking place. The Ravenclaw was learning that human children were far more complex than they appeared, and that taking one had consequences none of them could imagine. The storm was ending, but the real tempest was just beginning, and when humanity discovered what had happened to one of their cubs, the mountains themselves would tremble at their approach. Tommy woke up as the first rays of dawn filtered through the waterfall at the cave entrance. He had curled up against the wall on a patch of dry moss, using his rain jacket as a blanket. The Ravenclaw was still sleeping near the entrance, its massive chest rising and falling with deep, rumbling breaths. The child stood up quietly and began exploring his new surroundings with the fearless curiosity that defined his species. The cave was bigger than he had first thought, with several passages leading deeper into the mountain. Strange rock formations jutted from the walls, and the sound of running water echoed from somewhere in the darkness. Tommy found a collection of smooth stones near the underground stream and began arranging them in patterns, the way he did with his toys at home. As he worked, he hummed a little song his mother had taught him, completely unbothered by his situation. The Ravenclaw stirred at the sound, opening one yellow eye to check on its prey. What it saw defied all its hunting experience. The small creature was not cowering in terror or trying to escape. Instead, it was playing, making small structures from cave debris as if this were some kind of adventure. Tommy noticed the creature, watching him, and smiled brightly. "Good morning. Did you sleep okay? I found some really cool rocks. Look at this one." He held up a piece of quartz that sparkled in the morning light. "It's like a tiny star, isn't it?" The Ravenclaw blinked slowly, unsure how to respond. In its long life, it had encountered many species across different worlds. They all followed predictable patterns when captured: fear, panic, desperation, resignation. This small human was doing none of those things. As the hours passed, Tommy's behavior became even more puzzling. He used sharp stones to scrape moss from the walls, weaving it into rough cordage. He built a small dam in the stream using rocks and mud, creating a deeper pool for washing. He even attempted to start a fire using friction between two dry sticks, though he lacked the technique to make it work. "My dad taught me about making fires," Tommy explained to the watching predator. "But I'm not very good at it yet. He says practice makes perfect, though." The Ravenclaw began to understand that it was observing something extraordinary. This creature was not just intelligent, it was adaptable. It was taking an unfamiliar environment and systematically modifying it to suit its needs. The predator had seen tool use before in various species, but never with such casual confidence from something so young. Tommy found his small backpack, which had survived the journey to the cave, and began unpacking its contents. A half-eaten sandwich wrapped in foil, a small water bottle, some colorful crayons, and a few other items a 6-year-old might carry. To the Ravenclaw's amazement, the child carefully divided the sandwich in half and offered the larger portion to his captor. "You look hungry," Tommy said simply. "Mom says sharing food is how you make friends." The gesture was so unexpected that the Ravenclaw actually took a step back. In the natural world, prey did not offer itself to predators. Prey fought, fled, or froze. It did not share resources. Yet here was this tiny creature extending an act of kindness to something that could end its life with a casual swipe of its claws. The Ravenclaw sniffed the offered food cautiously. The smell was alien, but not unpleasant. After a moment of hesitation, it delicately took the sandwich portion with the tips of its claws and consumed it. The taste was strange, processed and artificial compared to fresh meat, but not entirely disagreeable. "Good, right?" Tommy asked cheerfully. "Mom makes the best sandwiches. She puts this special sauce on them that tastes like sunshine. Meanwhile, Far below in the valley, Robert Peterson was leading the search teams up the mountain. They had found the Ravenclaw's trail shortly after dawn, following claw marks on rock faces and disturbed vegetation. The creature was not trying to hide its passage, which suggested confidence in its mountain stronghold. The search party was equipped with military-grade gear that had arrived during the night. Portable scanners, climbing equipment, emergency, medical supplies, and enough firepower to handle multiple apex predators. Robert carried a plasma rifle that could punch through armored plating, while the other team members were similarly armed. Dr. Kim was using a biological scanner to track the creature's scent trail. "The readings are getting stronger," she reported. "We're close, maybe half a kilometer to the cave system." Alice was monitoring communications from the base camp they had established at the foot of the mountain. Every few minutes, she tried calling Tommy's emergency beacon, hoping against hope that he still had it with him. So far, nothing but static. Back in the cave, Tommy had discovered something that fascinated him even more than the sparkling rocks. In one corner of the chamber, hidden behind a rock formation, he found what appeared to be a collection of metal objects. Pieces of mining equipment, fragments of vehicles, various tools and components that the Ravenclaw had collected over the years. To an adult, it would have looked like a scrap pile. To a 6-year-old with an engineer for a father, it looked like the ultimate building set. Tommy began sorting through the materials, his young mind already envisioning the possibilities. He found lengths of cable, metal rods, some kind of power, cell that still held a charge, and various connectors and fasteners. Without conscious thought, he began assembling them into something that might have been art or might have been a primitive machine. The Ravenclaw watched with growing unease as the small creature worked. There was something deeply unsettling about the casual way it manipulated the materials, as if complex engineering was as natural as breathing. The child was humming again, completely absorbed in its task. Within an hour, Tommy had created a functioning pulley system using the cable and metal rods. He tested it by lifting rocks from one side of the cave to the other, giggling with delight when it worked exactly as he had intended. "Look what I made," he announced proudly to the Ravenclaw. "Dad showed me how pulleys work. You can lift really heavy things if you do it right." The predator stared at the improvised mechanism, its alien mind struggling to process what it was seeing. This tiny creature had just demonstrated engineering capabilities that rivaled some of the more advanced species the Ravenclaw had encountered, and it had done so while treating the entire situation as some kind of game. For the first time since capturing the child, the Ravenclaw began to feel something it had never experienced before when dealing with prey. It felt nervous. Outside, the sound of voices echoed off the mountain walls as the search teams drew closer. Robert's voice carried clearly in the thin air, calling Tommy's name with a desperation that made the stone walls seem to tremble. The Ravenclaw looked from the approaching humans to the small creature still playing with its improvised machines, and finally understood the true nature of its mistake. It had not captured prey. It had kidnapped the offspring of the most dangerous species in the galaxy, and they were coming to get it back. Tommy had been in the cave for almost 12 hours, and his creative mind was running out of simple projects. He had built 3 different pulley systems, constructed a small aqueduct to redirect part of the stream, and created what looked suspiciously like a primitive crossbow from scrap metal and cable. The Ravenclaw watched each new creation with growing alarm. The child seemed completely unaware that he was supposed to be afraid. Instead, he treated the cave like the ultimate playground, chattering constantly to his silent companion about everything he was building and why it worked the way it did. "See, if you put the lever here," Tommy explained while assembling his latest contraption, "and then you add some weight on this end, it gives you lots more force on the other end. Dad says it's called mechanical advantage. The device he was..." Describing was essentially a primitive catapult, built from cave debris and parts of the Ravenclaw's scrap collection. Tommy had found some kind of sticky resin seeping from the cave walls and was using it to bind his materials together. The Ravenclaw was beginning to understand that human children were not just small versions of the adults. They were something far more dangerous. They had all the creativity and problem-solving ability of their species, but none of the restraint that came with understanding consequences. Tommy's backpack had yielded another surprise that morning. Along with his school supplies, he carried a small chemistry set that his father had given him for his birthday. It was designed to be safe for children, but in the hands of a species that could turn cave moss into rope and scrap metal into machines, even safe became relative. "Look at this," Tommy said excitedly, mixing some of the chemicals with water from the stream. "If I add this powder to this liquid, it makes bubbles and gets really hot. I wonder what happens if I put it in a closed container." The Ravenclaw did not want to find out. It had seen enough human engineering for one lifetime. Every few minutes it glanced nervously toward the cave entrance, listening for sounds of the approaching search party that it now knew must be coming. The voices had been getting closer since dawn. Human voices, calling the child's name with an urgency that made the predator's scales prickle with instinctive fear. These were not the sounds of creatures mourning lost prey. These were the sounds of a pack preparing for war. Tommy heard the voices, too, and brightened considerably. "That sounds like Mom and Dad. Are they coming to visit?" He waved enthusiastically toward the cave entrance, as if expecting his parents to walk in for a casual social call. The Ravenclaw made a decision that went against every hunting instinct it possessed. It moved to the cave entrance and let out a series of low, rumbling calls. It was not a threat display or a territorial challenge. It was an attempt at communication, a signal of peaceful intent. The response was immediate and terrifying. The human voices stopped calling the child's name and began coordinating in sharp, clipped tones. The Ravenclaw heard words like target, acquired, and surround the position that needed no translation. These creatures were not here to negotiate. Robert Peterson crouched behind a boulder 50 meters from the cave entrance, his plasma rifle charged and ready. Through his scope, he could see movement in the shadows behind the waterfall. Something large was definitely in there, and if the thermal readings were correct, there was also a much smaller heat signature nearby. "Tommy's alive," he reported over the comm. "Readings show he's mobile and active." "Can you get a clear shot at the creature?" asked Bill Wong, who was positioning his team on the opposite side of the cave entrance. "Negative. Too much risk of hitting Tommy if it's holding him." Dr. Kim was monitoring the situation from a safer distance, using long-range sensors to analyze the cave system. "The creature called out a few minutes ago," she reported. "The vocal patterns suggest communication attempt rather than aggression. I don't care if it wants to recite poetry," Robert said grimly. "It took my son." Inside the cave, Tommy was oblivious to the tactical situation developing outside. He had just discovered that by combining some of his chemistry set components with the sticky resin, he could create small explosive charges. They were not particularly powerful, more like firecrackers than bombs, but they demonstrated yet another aspect of human ingenuity that the Ravenclaw found deeply disturbing. Bang! Tommy laughed as one of his creations produced a small flash and a popping sound. "That was a good one. I bet I could make a bigger one if I used more of the fizzy powder." The Ravenclaw realized with growing horror that this tiny creature was casually creating weapons while humming children's songs. It was perhaps the most unsettling combination the Predator had ever witnessed. Outside, the human search teams had completed their encirclement of the cave. Robert could see muzzle flashes as his teammates tested their weapons and adjusted their positions. Everyone was waiting for his signal to begin the assault. "Final approach in 60 seconds, he announced over the comm. "Remember, Tommy is the priority. Everything else is acceptable collateral damage." The Ravenclaw heard something in the human, voices that finally made it understand the full scope of its mistake. These creatures were not coming to negotiate for their offspring's return. They were coming to extract him, and they would destroy anything that stood in their way. The Predator looked at Tommy, who was now working on some kind of mechanical timer made from parts of a broken chronometer. The child was completely absorbed in his project, occasionally pausing to examine his work from different angles or to hum a few bars of melody. For the first time in its long life, the Ravenclaw felt something that might have been regret. It had seen this creature's capacity for creation and innovation. It had witnessed the casual kindness with which the child had shared his food, and now it understood that by taking him, it had condemned itself to face the wrath of the most relentless species in known space. The sounds outside grew closer and more organized. Equipment being moved into position, voices coordinating final preparations, the distinctive whine of energy weapons charging to full power. The Ravenclaw made its final decision. Moving carefully so as not to startle the child, it began to back toward the cave entrance. If it was going to die, it would at least try to return the human cub to his pack first. Maybe, if it was very lucky, they would be satisfied with just destroying it quickly. But as the first plasma bolt lit up the cave entrance and the assault began, the Ravenclaw realized that luck was not something humans believed in when it came to protecting their young. They believed in overwhelming force and absolute certainty. The reckoning had begun, and there would be no mercy for those who threatened human children. The first plasma bolt struck the rock face beside the cave entrance, sending molten stones spraying in all directions. The Ravenclaw pressed itself against the cave wall, realizing that the humans were not aiming to kill it immediately. They were making a statement. Tommy looked up from his latest creation, a small mechanical device that looked like a cross between a music box and a grenade. "Wow, that was loud. Is that fireworks? Are we having a party?" The Ravenclaw stared at the child in amazement. Even with energy weapons firing outside their cave, the small human remained completely unafraid. If anything, he seemed excited by the possibility of celebration. Robert's voice echoed off the mountain walls, amplified by a portable speaker system. "This is your only warning. Release the child and surrender immediately, or we will bring down this entire mountain." The Ravenclaw understood enough human language to grasp the ultimatum. It also understood that the threat was not empty bluster. Through the cave entrance, it could see the glint of heavy equipment being moved into position. The humans had brought enough firepower to level the mountainside if necessary. Making a decision that went against every survival instinct it possessed, the Ravenclaw gently approached Tommy. The child looked up with that bright, curious smile that had haunted the Predator's thoughts for the past day. "Are we going outside now?" Tommy asked. "I'd like to see what all the noise is about." The Ravenclaw carefully scooped up the child, holding him as gently as possible. Tommy settled into the creature's massive claws as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "Your hands are really warm," he observed. "And they're so big. I bet you could pick up a whole tree." Moving slowly toward the cave entrance, the Ravenclaw tried to project every peaceful intention it could manage. It held Tommy out slightly, making it clear that the child was unharmed and being returned willingly. Robert saw them first through his rifle scope. His son, looking perfectly healthy and completely unbothered, being carried by a creature that could have torn him apart without effort. For a moment, the sight defied all logic. "Hold fire," Robert commanded over the comm. "The target is surrendering. Tommy spotted his father through the waterfall and waved enthusiastically. "Dad, look at my new friend. He's really big, and he has a really cool cave with lots of neat stuff in it." The Ravenclaw continued its careful approach, moving with deliberate slowness to avoid triggering the human's defensive reflexes. Every step was calculated to demonstrate peaceful intent. When it reached the cave entrance, it gently set Tommy down on the rocky ledge. Tommy immediately ran toward his father, chattering excitedly about all the things he had built and discovered. "Dad, you have to see what I made. I figured out how to make pulleys work, and I built a catapult, and I mixed some chemicals that made really cool explosions." Robert swept his son into a fierce hug, checking quickly for injuries while listening to the stream of excited chatter. Tommy was not just unharmed, he was energized and happy. The experience that should have traumatized him had instead been treated as the ultimate adventure. The Ravenclaw remained at the cave entrance, making no aggressive moves. It seemed to understand that its fate was now entirely in human hands. The creature that had once been an apex predator now waited passively for judgment. Alice Peterson arrived moments later, having climbed the mountain with the backup team. She gathered her son into her arms, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Tommy, baby, we were so scared. Are you hurt? Did it try to hurt you?" "Hurt me?" Tommy looked genuinely confused by the question. "No. He was really nice. He shared his cave with me, and he ate some of my sandwich, and he watched me build things. I think he was lonely." The humans exchanged glances over the child's head. Dr. Kim approached with her scanner, confirming what they could all see. Tommy showed no signs of physical or psychological trauma. If anything, he seemed more excited and energetic than usual. Bill Wong kept his weapon trained on the Ravenclaw, waiting for orders. The creature made no attempt to flee or fight. It simply stood there, watching the human family reunion with what might have been understanding in its alien eyes. Robert faced a decision that would define not just this moment, but potentially the relationship between humanity and the other species on this world. The creature had taken his son, but it had also returned him unharmed. More than that, it had treated Tommy with what appeared to be genuine care. "Stand down," Robert ordered his teams. "Lower your weapons." The Ravenclaw seemed to sag with relief, though it remained motionless. It had expected death, and the reprieve was almost more shocking than the original capture. Tommy wiggled out of his mother's arms and walked back toward the creature. "Are you okay? You look sad. Don't be sad. I had fun, and now my mom and dad are here, so we can all be friends." The sight of a 6-year-old human child trying to comfort a 12-foot predator would have been absurd under normal circumstances. But there was nothing normal about this situation. The Ravenclaw lowered its massive head until it was level with Tommy, and the child gently patted its scaled snout. "See?" Tommy said to his parents. "He's nice. He just needed a friend." Dr. Kim was recording everything with her scanner, documenting what might be the first peaceful interspecies contact on Haven's Edge. "The creature's bio readings show elevated stress but no aggression," she reported. I think it's actually showing remorse." Robert holstered his weapon and approached slowly. The Ravenclaw tensed but did not retreat. When Robert spoke, his voice was steady but carried the weight of absolute authority. "You took something that belonged to us," he said. "In our culture, that demands a response. But you also protected what you took, and you returned it freely. That earns consideration." The Ravenclaw seemed to understand that it was being judged. It remained perfectly still, accepting whatever verdict the humans would deliver. Robert studied the creature for a long moment, then looked at his son, who was still chattering about all the wonderful things he had discovered. The child showed no fear, no trauma, no understanding that he had been in mortal danger. To Tommy, This had simply been an unexpected adventure with a new friend. "You will leave this territory," Robert said finally. "You will not approach our settlement again. And you will spread word to others of your kind that human children are not prey. They are protected by forces you cannot imagine." The Ravenclaw dipped its massive head in what appeared to be acknowledgement. It understood the terms of its reprieve, and more importantly, it understood the warning embedded within them. As the creature began to retreat deeper into the mountains, Tommy called after it, "Bye! Thanks for showing me your cave. Maybe we can play again sometime." Alice put a gentle hand on her son's shoulder. "I don't think we'll be seeing him again, sweetheart. He has to go back to his home now." "That's okay," Tommy said philosophically. "I hope he finds some friends up there. Everyone needs friends." The search teams began their descent, carrying equipment and the remarkable story of what had transpired. Word would spread through the colony, then to other settlements, and eventually across the galaxy. The tale would grow with each telling, but the core truth would remain unchanged. Humanity had sent a message that day, not through violence or destruction, but through the demonstration of what they were capable of when their young were threatened. The massive mobilization of resources, the overwhelming display of firepower, the absolute determination to recover their child, all of it had been witnessed by a creature that would carry the story to others of its kind. But perhaps more importantly, they had shown mercy when they could have chosen vengeance. The Ravenclaw would remember that too, and that memory would shape how other species viewed humanity in the years to come. Dr. Kim compiled her report during the journey back to the colony. The incident would be studied for decades as an example of first contact protocols and interspecies diplomacy. But she suspected that the most important lessons would come from watching Tommy Peterson, who had turned a potential tragedy into an adventure through nothing more than curiosity, kindness, and the absolute fearlessness that seemed to define human children. As they reached the valley floor, Alice asked her son what he had learned from his experience. Tommy considered the question seriously. "I learned that even really big, scary-looking things can be lonely," he said. "And I learned that sharing your sandwich is always a good idea. And I learned that you can build really cool stuff if you use your imagination." He paused, then added with the wisdom that sometimes comes from the mouths of children, "And I learned that when people love you, they'll move mountains to find you." Robert smiled at his son's words, but his expression grew serious as he looked back at the peaks where the Ravenclaw had disappeared. The creature was gone, but the message had been delivered. Across the galaxy, other predators would hear the story and understand the fundamental truth it contained. Humanity's greatest weapon was not their technology or their firepower. It was their absolute uncompromising devotion to protecting their young. And any creature foolish enough to threaten that bond would discover that there were forces in the universe far more dangerous than claws and fangs. The universe had learned something important that day. Human children might look small and helpless, but they were protected by the most relentless force in known space. And that protection came not from the children themselves, but from what would come hunting when one of them went missing. The Ravenclaw's mistake had costed its territory and nearly its life, but its survival would serve as a warning to others. A story passed down through generations of predators who would learn to recognize the signs and avoid the trap. Never hunt a human cub, not because the cub is dangerous, but because of what comes hunting in return. The message was simple, absolute, and would echo across the stars for generations to come.